other book on the film Gentleman's Agreement. I'm hoping when that comes out, we can screen Gentleman's Agreement as part of the film festival. Anyway, we're thrilled. I'm thrilled to introduce Rachel to discuss The Rabbi Goes West.
Thank you, Norm. Let's see, I'm curious to hear who people ended up sympathizing with in the film. I was actually surprised how much I did sympathize with the Chabad rabbi. As an opening question, which side who did you end up feeling sympathy for?
I'm happy to address this topic because it's something that I've been thinking about since viewing Incitement. People didn't agree with me in the discussion afterward, but I felt that it depended on what view you brought to the movie, whether you were sympathetic with the person who killed Rabbi and that ultra-religious sect that thought that it was biblically inspired, or with people who thought it was an atrocity, which of course, well, maybe not of course, but is certainly the people that I related to. And I thought the same thing as I was watching this movie, that it depended on what view you brought to the film. And I didn't appreciate the Chabad rabbi. I mean, he's a very nice guy, jovial, seems sincere, but he's way too extreme for me. And so, of course, I was very empathetic with the conservative and reformed and retired rabbis. But I think that the film, it all depends on what beliefs, what faith you bring to the viewing.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about if I were to teach this film in class. Am I frozen, by the way? Oh, okay. All right. I'm thinking about what Heath just said about what you bring to the class. If I were to teach this in a class in American Judaism, it would, sort of be about how Judaism as a religion is able to have some victories in the late 20th and 21st century, because I think the past generation has been more about Judaism or Jewishness as culture for most American Jews, and Chabad seems like one of the rare real wins for Judaism as a religion on the American scene, that Jews who feel like they don't get enough of something that feels like it's really about faith and God and spirituality are often able to find it in Chabad if they end up coming across a Chabad rabbi. I was also really struck by the rabbi's salesman language, that he sort of considers himself a salesman for religion, and it made me wonder if that isn't the problem with other rabbis, that they don't see, or the fact that their pews might be empty. Is it that they don't do enough of the kind of outreach that the Chabad rabbi was doing? And the other thing that I was struck by was the Jews who felt comfortable in Chabad really talked about that ability to come as you are and not be judged, which made me wonder at what point American Jews started to feel so judged by Judaism and other Jews, because it seemed like these individuals who felt at home in Chabad, it wasn't because they were all so observant or religious, but they felt this come as you are. Ironically, they felt this come as you are kind of feeling in the Chabad environment. And that did make me wonder when and how synagogues have maybe made so many Jews feel uncomfortable, because I thought that was sort of the subtext that in other synagogues they'd been to, they had felt out of place. But that might also, although I think the issue of class didn't come up, I did sort of wonder if that was kind of behind the scenes there, that some of the people who found a home in Chabad, just sort of weren't able to feel comfortable in the kind of middle class or upper middle class synagogues that might be most comfortable for nuclear families, and not single people or divorced people or people who feel like they don't match what a Jew is, quote, supposed to be. Anyway, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how this Chabad rabbi was able to be so. Oh, and the other thing I guess I should just mention is that I thought this story of adoption was kind of in some ways really the story that I wanted to hear more about, because the Chabad rabbi, I can't imagine it would be so comfortable for him to be walking around Brooklyn with what looked like maybe a kind of multiracial family. I didn't get to see all the children super well, but
It was.
yeah. And so, it seemed like actually for the rabbi and his wife, they were in a way so off the derech of most, or so off the beaten path of most Chabad Jews, that really Montana was probably the best home for them. But I thought that the adoption story and how they worked that out with their rabbi and their families, and what kind of tension or maybe none it had caused, or what discussions it brought up, was sort of a hidden story that I would have been interested in hearing more about.
If I can back up a minute and talk about the structure of the film, because I think what the filmmakers were trying to do was create a certain amount of sympathy at the beginning of the film, and to give the most positive aspects of the Chabad story initially, and then to present the reaction to the racism in Whitefish and the gender politics much later in the film, so that there's a developmental structure to the documentary itself.
Okay. I see what you're saying, Maureen. Anyone else have thoughts about, who you might have sided for, or how sympathy worked for you when you watched it?
But I think that you're raising an important issue, and what the nature of documentary filmmaking is, that you're very dependent upon how people are on camera. And the Chabad rabbi was quite brilliant on camera. He's very charismatic. And it's hard not to like him on camera, irrespective of what he was saying. And so, you see the ways in which individuals sort of affect their situations and affect, small communities by virtue of their charisma. So.
Elgin, he was obviously a charismatic character. We've seen others, right? In the beginning, correct, I really did find him quite charming, following his life, what he was like as a child. But I agree with the progression. And I think the moment that is a turning point, not in terms of siding, I actually, can't think so much in those ways. But there's a turning point, and that's when he becomes very angry. He can't have that conversation anymore. Once you get to gender politics, he shuts down. He kind of throws his mic down. He won't actually enter into an argument because we're no longer in his comfort zone, and he will not argue. So that's probably a turning point in the film, or sort of the marking moment when viewers will, or some viewers will, start to lose, I suppose, sympathy, despite his charm and what he offers. And what he offers in the first part, it's a joyous Judaism. Who can argue with, Judaism should be fun. We all want fun. However, when it comes down to the pragmatics of things, certainly the other communities will feel excluded, and do. And I, as I said, it's not a matter of sides for me, because there's sort of a place for all. But, we see in our community, Chabad does, welcome hundreds every Friday and is very open and is an incredibly joyous place to be. Whether you want to live a, Lubavitcher lifestyle is another question.
Yeah, I felt like the film had set it up as sides, but I mean, Gail, I take your point that we prefer that weren't the case, but but it seemed like it took me 2/3 of the way in to actually see how to understand that the other rabbis actually felt quite snubbed and disrespected, which I understood. But I think it was the female rabbi who might have said, I wasn't even invited when he sort of, and I sort of felt how, oh yeah, I guess if any of us were her, we'd also feel that way.
Well, there is snubbed and disrespected. Absolutely. No denying that.
Yeah.
And the counterpoint to it is how receptive he is, not just to members of the community, but also to his family. The fact that they have an adopted family, and you can't not feel for him in the course of the film, or feel for them in the course of the film. So it's an interesting kind of tension between, on the one hand, someone who excludes, or that the Chabad excludes women, etc., excludes the other rabbis, and on the other hand, includes by incorporating lone people, or people need to be adopted into their family.
Norm.
So if I could answer, so you're kind of, there's never a point in which you say, oh, I side with him or I side with them. You're always torn in a very complex way of identifying or not identifying with the various dilemmas here.
Norm, were you gonna say something?
Lois had a question. If we could, sorry, Lois has very patiently had her hand up. If we could, thank you.
Hi, I think I'm on here. I'm in Jacksonville, and I can see both sides of this because Chabad has about 5 or 6 houses in Jacksonville, and it's certainly drained from the other synagogues. However, it's a free country and it's a competitive field, let's say. I mean, why not set up your business and run it like you want to run it? And they are very welcoming. And he admits in his case that he became more of a libertarian out there, seeing how the Montanans live. But I think it was Rachel that had the point, is he really does sell. And I don't think that our rabbis sell. I think that they stay in their offices and have services, and they're not out there really inviting, encouraging others to come into their synagogues. And I can remember moving here maybe 40 years ago, and as a young couple, and walking in and feeling examined by the people who were sitting there, let's say at a sisterhood meeting. And I don't think it was, I'm active there now. I'm on the board of the conservative synagogue, but that doesn't mean that I don't see the flaws of how we welcome. And it seems as if Chabad has found a way to be very welcoming. And they may ultimately work up, like he said, first I put a mezuzah on your door, and then I ask you to come to services, and then I want you to get some matzah from, and they bring them in, but as they do, they seem to be very welcoming in how they do that. So in a free country, it seems as if they have their way of doing it, and the other synagogues need to learn how to, if you will, compete.
Norm, were you going to say something?
No, I think it's a good point. And it sort of leads me to what I was going to say. This is a Western, isn't it? The rabbi goes west. He's the Eastern dude, who shows up in the Western town and is told, stranger, this town ain't big enough for the two of us. And he learns to shoot. I'm trying to understand it as kind of an American Western, as well as an argument over religion. Irregardless of what you think about Chabad, he's talked about like he's the stranger who just rode into town and is somehow doing something underhanded. Well, it's about more than the mezuzahs. Well, it's always something.
Can I respond to that, because it's very much inscribed in the filming.
What's that?
it's very much inscribed in the filming.
Yeah, the landscapes and if
Yeah.
that's what you mean.
And
Yeah.
the shot in the doorway when he goes to visit the man who seems to live alone
Yes.
and the ranch style house.
Mm.
That's a shot that's a citation of the Searchers.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And you know, I know Jerry. He's like deeply into the Western. So that's part of what's going on.
Okay. Well, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I guess it was interesting to me how distasteful the idea of missionizing seemed to some of the sort of non-Chabad people. That they might acknowledge that it seemed like they might acknowledge something was working about what the Chabad rabbi was doing, but I think it's the case for many Jews who are turned off by Chabad today that they find it not Jewish to be going out there and trying to push religion on people as though, you know, that's sort of more a Christian thing to do in American religious history. And it seems like it sort of upsets American Jewish sensibilities that Chabad in recent decades has been so in our faces that way.
Do you think if he had been another conservative rabbi, given the small Jewish population, if another Chabad sets up in Orlando or something, it's no big deal. But do you think it has something to do with just the very finite number of Jews, and that had he been a conservative rabbi, the language would have been different because you wouldn't have had the language of exclusion and all of that, but the reaction might have been somewhat similar?
I mean, I think their sense of being rejected by him, of being sort of delegitimized as Jews and rabbis, you know, it was almost like none of them could articulate it fully, but it seemed like they felt actually that real hurt inside, like he doesn't even recognize me as a rabbi. I mean, certainly the female rabbi must have felt that way, but I'm sure, and the renewal rabbis, I mean, they knew that and they never quite said that out, but I felt like that was actually the real inner hurt that you know, when they had that scene with the Chabad rabbi talking to, I guess he was the renewal rabbi. I mean, there was so much, I sort of wanted to almost skip that scene. It was, I don't know how you found watching it, but there was so much tension there. I was trying to figure out, was there any way that conversation could have worked?
Yeah, not to have it.
Right.
The other language that I found interesting or was surprised at was they were talking about being outed. So these are people who are trying to, you know, self-haters or trying to hide their Judaism, and they use the language of the closet, right? So he's outing people as Jews. So you have the sort of combination of addressing those who, you know, he wants them to look at their Judaism with pride, whereas others think it's crossing of boundaries. Now, those who are being outed, are they really going to go over to Chabad? Do what we see, you know, from what we see, do people really move with Chabad, or does it become a force in the community for particularly university students who sort of pass through and then go on to their lives, generally going back to the socioeconomic and religious structures that they come from? I'd be hard pressed to guess that there's going to be a real draw on the population and a change toward, you know, a Chabad population regardless. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
I saw Heath's hand before. Sorry, then Jack.
I think another time when he really alienated the other rabbis and many people in those communities is when the white supremacists started to act out and threaten the Jewish community. And his response to that didn't seem to have any kind of heart to it other than what was based on his religious beliefs, that giving a Chumash to every Jew in Montana was somehow going to make that threat dissolve. And I understand that that's his belief. I'm sure he really believes that. I sure hope he does. But I don't, and many of the other people Jews in Montana don't. And I think in the Reform rabbi, the woman, was her name Francine, she said that it was very disappointing and didn't do any good. And it was kind of insulting.
Terribly insulting. And I think that also, to go back to what Rachel was saying, the conversation between the renewal rabbi and the Chabad rabbi is the only moment where we actually get a theological confrontation. And he is so closed-minded and so angry very quickly. And, you know, sarcastic, and, you know, he can't stand doubt. And I have to say that I grew up in a Jewish tradition that was filled with doubt, you know, Reform tradition. And I find, even in conservative synagogues, that tendency not to love the questioning that is there in the Jewish tradition really bizarre.
That was a moment.
I thought this was the strength of the film, that it demonstrated that there were certain kind of fissures that were not really resolvable. That you know, what Chabad believes is not what most American Jews believe, and that it could put a very nice gloss on things and make it look like we're all able to be part of this community, in one way or another. But fundamentally, we believe very different things. It's almost like we have different religions. Actually, not almost like it is. We do have different religions, and especially when you add to it the messianism of contemporary Chabad, it's quite striking. I mean, it's like it's for many Jews, it's really quite bizarre. So I think the film demonstrates it without telling you directly. You can see it, and and I think it's a good film from that standpoint. I think it's a great film for teaching American Judaism, because there's so much here and so much to unpack.
Yeah, it almost felt like two strands of American Judaism to me, in terms of the liberal, what Maureen was describing, this comfort with debate and question and intellectual conversation, which seemed so attractive, like post-World War II into the 21st century. Many of us grew up in that tradition, but then the Chabad seems to represent something closer to a fundamentalist religion, and yet without requiring that everyone actually be a fundamentalist themselves. You can come and eat with us and be with us, but you can do whatever in your home. And I think it provided some comfort to some Jews that it seemed to have the answers for everything, and there was no questioning and debate. Jordan, you were going to say something?
Yes. Am I muted?
Yeah, no, you're fine.
We can hear you.
Okay. So, I mean, to me, this movie was in many ways just a case of deja vu. I can recall in my lifetime 3 or 4 different communities I've been associated with that went through this same type of a situation, of a Chabad that appears to be picking the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and leaving the community to figure out what else they can do. You know, when they pick up the low-hanging fruit, they also pick up the low-hanging money. And there are, I'm sure, a lot of communities that are suffering because Chabad is taking resources that up until that point had been used within the community. But the other point I wanted to make, though, is that when they had the incident with the, toward the end of the movie with the skinheads or whatever it was, So one thing that was said, which I thought was really the truth, is that Chabad would very much like to portray itself as the spokesman for the Jewish community any place they can. And I've seen a couple places where they have basically been on the outside until some magic moment, and then pow, they come in and they take a bunch, if not all, of the glory. So as I said, there's nothing new in this film that at least I haven't seen. And I'd like to give you an answer to how to resolve it, but that's for another movie.
Right. I see. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have one question regarding the Jordan. In the film, they mention the word cult. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that word, because they're groomed to do this kind of shaliach thing. And if you saw, the other place in Montana was a relative. And there's often a relative, and we also have that here. There's a relative of a Chabad rabbi is in Ocala. There's a relative, and it goes on. It's this big family thing and cult.
It's a cottage industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually felt like the rabbi's response there was sort of good, that, you know, you are free to leave and come and go. So I mean, cult, I understand the cult, or the desire to say it shares some characteristics, but I guess it doesn't seem like a cult exactly to me.
Well, one thing that's funny is that the word cult used to be used to describe Judaism, not pejoratively. It used to be a self-description. And the pejorative aspect of cults annihilated that.
It's still used. I mean, it's still the term in French for religion, right? Cult. But I did notice, Cindy, that they use both cult and sect a few times, trying to sort of push on that.
Oh, I see. Bud Shorsting is with us. Bud has been in my class on post-Holocaust American Jews this semester, and he often offers a historical perspective. I'm curious, Bud, when you started to notice Chabad presence in Florida, since you have this long view.
Oh, I guess 20, 25 years ago at least. And of course, what's so fascinating about the Chabad movement is it seems to be the only segment of Judaism that is growing and expanding. So obviously they have great success in what they're doing. I by the way, I learned a great deal about Chabad from the film that I didn't know. And I also learned a great deal about Jews in Montana that I didn't know. I was shocked to hear that there's 2,000 Jews in Montana. It sounds like all of them are affiliated one place or another. But I thought it was an excellent movie. I really enjoyed it.
I just want to add to that one of the things that the film did to me both times I saw it, it made me want to move to Montana. It's really beautiful, you know.
Except for the snow.
I like snow.
Right, they had that point about it. It's the kind of place where you have to self-consciously affiliate with Judaism. You're not going to be able to imbibe it on the streets, you know, of a city, which maybe is true for us in Gainesville too. I don't know, but
we can buy bagels here. They can't.
Other thoughts?
I had some other thoughts in regards to the film, and I'm not sure I remember them at this point. But the film, I go back to this issue of the family that he created and the adoptions that he did. I'm not sure you're correct about that sort of having multiple races in a family would be completely out of whack in Brooklyn. I'm not sure you're correct about that. And I have seen Puerto Rican Hasidim in Williamsburg, people who are contiguous with the community who end up becoming converts. You know, their trajectory in terms of marriage, et cetera, is complex, but they do exist. And there are black Hasidim as well.
Yeah, I guess it raised questions about, you know, what it is like for a couple like that not to be able, you know, to not be able to have their own children. I don't know. I don't know if they're judged harshly by their community or.
That's a bigger question, I think. I mean, a big question, because in the very religious communities, there's huge pressure for, you know, in vitro. Before she got to God didn't give us this blessing. she probably went through years, an enormous amount of pressure, and that's being incorporated more and more in television series and in films. Even back in Slugim, you saw the lead character Yifat struggling with, you know, fertility drugs and feeling out of whack. Another film, I don't remember which one it was, Jack, you might remember. It was an unmarried person who's trying desperately to get married because she needs to reproduce. So one of the interesting things is, if you look, Alexa said, and I guess, you know, it would have been interesting to plumb that a little bit. It's interesting that they picked so many girls so far, because the assumption is they are going to adopt more. And I started to think about that. Is it because of the dictum to reproduce, or was it just by chance? It would have been interesting to know how the adoption process went. And if, you know, if I was the interviewer, I know I would have been in there. But in all, I was most struck by his shutdown, and that moment where he literally breaks down. You know, male authority is questioned and he just shuts. I thought it was a sort of discrediting moment in the film. There's not a whole lot that he says other than talking about when the Messiah comes, where you can disagree with him because it's vacuous, right? But once he goes there, he.
But that's who he is. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, what's good about it is that you know, this facade of like being open and corporative, etc., melts away, and you see this fundamentally is what he believes.
Yeah, I wondered about the other rabbis. You know, they also seemed so upset by what he was doing, and I guess I come back to that feeling that it was because it was ultimately about their own feeling of being rejected by him as Jews. You know, because as Norm asked before, what if he had just been a different kind of other rabbi? Of course, someone's going to set up their own shop, but I think it was, you know, I guess I think it would have been a different case if they felt that a different rabbi wasn't ultimately not accepting them as Jews and rabbis.
And even others. I mean, he felt that he was disrespectful of people's privacy by, quote, outing. So, yeah.
Following up on Jack's comment and the general topic, is that it's hypocritical, isn't it, or ironic, that these people are saying, oh, he's so welcoming, I don't feel judged, anything is okay, I'm fully accepted, but he can't discuss religion and theology. Unless
you can discuss it.
Unless you're in agreement with him. You know, he called it quits. He terminated the conversation.
Well, you can't talk back.
Yeah, you can't have debate. I was struck by also the analysis of the economic structure of Chabad that's implicit once they include the footage from Brooklyn and a little bit of the history. And you realize that these outposts are funded as a kind of imperialist gesture from central headquarters until they're supposed to become self-sufficient, and that there's actually that initial appeal that is very different than an established synagogue that's got to demand dues up front, right? Versus this kind of thing where you're invited to Shabbat dinners over and over again, and then, you know, it may be years before the community then has to give financial support to the synagogue and the rabbi. And the film was very careful to include that.
You know, if we were doing a sociological study of this, you know, what we would want to know, and that the film does not address, what about failed Chabad houses? What about shlichim who really aren't able to raise money and where they really go under? There must be cases of that. So all we're seeing here is a great success, but they can't all be successful.
That's
They
another.
branched off, as we see at the end of the film, into education. So
Yeah.
there are these private schools like the ones in Miami. And those are money-making propositions.
Norm?
Back to Maureen's point, like there's a moment in the film where he's talking to who is it, Kursky, the secretary from Sheriff's
Krinsky, I think.
Krinsky. So something about universities, like we're sort of going after the university students I forget what it was, sort of an eye roll, and to sort of rescue them from university faculty or something.
Right, the last moment, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a.
Yeah, he said liberal professors, unfortunately.
What's that?
He said we need to get them away from liberal professors, and then he said who they spend most of their time with, and then he ended on the word unfortunately.
And it's very clear that he knows that the filmmakers, Jerry and Amy, are the enemy, because when Jerry's questioning him at one point, he says, well, you probably voted for Obama.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, actually, I thought the film, it sounds like, Maureen, you know a lot about them, but to me, I felt like they were really good at having a very light presence. I didn't feel them much in this film.
No, but then they do include that when they didn't have to, because that's the revolution structure to it, that towards the end, they're able to reveal more. Yeah, no, I've known Jerry since college, so and I know that the film making, the documentary filmmaker that he likes the best is Opals in Colorado City. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess another question it raises for me, because most of my research is on post-war American Jews, is when, the presence of these very religious-looking Jews became sort of okay to some American Jews. In the 50s, we have some examples of how embarrassing it was for American Jews when they confronted, when they saw sort of survivors or refugees. I'm thinking even of, I guess, Philip Roth's 1959 collection, Goodbye Columbus. There's the short story, Eli the Fanatic, where liberal Jews in a suburb come across some of these kind of Hasidic-like Eastern European Jews who were religious and who would have been dressing in a similar way as our Chabad rabbi in the film. And it's embarrassing for the liberal suburban Jews of the 50s to see this, especially since they've so recently, bettered themselves and seem to be like on the cusp of acceptance. But it doesn't seem like it's an embarrassing experience by this point for American Jews to have to see this kind of, to see Lubavitch or, Jews around town, or I'm that emotion didn't seem to come up there the way it does for me when I'm researching the 50s. So that's sort of an interesting change of response, I think.
Well, it does in Brooklyn. I mean, the secular Jews in Brooklyn are extraordinarily put off by the various deeply religious sects.
Jordan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so in answer to that thought, I'm thinking back to my youth and to the late 50s, when I was very much associated with Chabad. And what I recall at that time is that Chabad was very religious in the sense of religious observance, and in the sense of trying to get the religious observance to be followed by the community. So they would at times be very intimidating about people who were sinning and what they were doing and what they should be doing, and that kind of thing. But it happened, I think, somewhere around the early 60s, that they established a different worldview, that they need to establish a place where Jews can come and be welcome and be loved and not feel that they were being intimidated. So I think that's about, in my mind, is about when that happened.
That's interesting, like a new tactic or strategy. Yeah, what kind of environment to build. I am curious. It sounds like almost a marketing kind of decision or conversation.
But there is at the same time this tension between what we all saw, between this idea of welcoming and being a nice guy and saying everyone else has it wrong. I mean, right from the start with the mezuzah itself, giving you this mezuzah to protect your house, and by the way, everybody else has the wrong mezuzah. It's just it made me wonder. Oh man, do I have a? So.
No, but think of it also. I mean, the fact that the preoccupation with having people put mezuzahs on their doors, particularly they should on their front doors, not anywhere so much in the interior of the house, is sort of like projecting an in-your-face Judaism, and it's sort of getting your average Joe Schmo American Jew to do precisely that, to be much more outward in their projection of who they are. It's a very interesting transformation, and it's really an assault on secular Judaism, on how Jews have been for a couple hundred years or other, or at least 150 years. The other thing I was thinking about in relation to that was sorry, I forgot my train of thought. But oh yeah, sorry. On the street, the fact that he's walking on the street with a lulav and esrog, it's we now take it for granted. We've seen a lot of it, but still, to walk around Montana with this, it's really something. I mean, it's like in the place you're supposed to be walking around with a shotgun, instead you walk around with a lulav and esrog. I was very struck by that, and I was also struck by. I had a different feeling about the giving out of Chumashim than some of you have. I like the fact that they were giving out Chumashim, and this was their response to the anti-Semitism. And it was saying that the real response is an inner response. Is that look at the Hebrew Bible, be more Jewish. This is a proper response to anti-Semitism. I think it's a very profound statement.
I think I remember the Daily Stormer attacking here, and I don't remember anyone doing anything or sending any Bibles out.
Oh, we're not in Montana.
I had under my bed.
Good reason, I guess. But what I'm saying is he was being attacked for this act, which was at least an act. I mean, fine, but really, we have seen similar here. One of the things that I think is interesting,
and at the same time, it was.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting, obviously it would be different for Montana, is that that sort of welcoming thing to Shabbat dinners, to events, Hanukkah, the really in-your-face Judaism, which Rachel, you might have called a win, in that people will acknowledge their Judaism at all. So yes, Jack, an attack on secular Judaism is the fact that a lot of Chabads that are set up in places like here, we're not competing necessarily for congregants, because the population's transient. They're competing for donors, which is why the school mechanism is the business mechanism. But I'm not so, but there in Montana, it may actually be to some degree for congregants. But I think that a lot of the places, and certainly the one in South Florida that I know, this one, since I have been to services both in the morning and in the evening years back, it's not a matter of congregants. Those are students, and they're coming and they're going. They have their couple of mainstay pillars who are going to be donating. So it's a different structure, I think.
Mm-hmm. But there in Montana, they need the money to build the buildings and to maintain the infrastructure. So.
And the congregants. And I don't know that the congregants that they interviewed didn't really follow him at all. They just like something about the ambiance there. If you listen to them, almost all of them were questioning him. So yeah, of course they need the donors, and they probably also need the congregants.
I think there's something really attractive about the devotion to family structure in the context of people who had failed marriages or don't have, steady dates in college.
Mhm.
There's something about the promise of finding something that will be where men and women could be devoted to the same goals as part of a community ethos.
Yeah, I think of it too, Maureen. What you say reminds me when I came here, to Gainesville, the situation between the Chabad and the Hillel at the time, and I know there's already been some change, was described, and someone said, at Hillel, they just have like a food truck, and Chabad was like literally providing chicken soup for the Jewish soul, but it was also actually providing chicken soup. And I think even college kids sort of had this feeling of like, what's going on with our Hillel that, they're not even providing that sort of homey atmosphere. I guess just because the rabbi at the time was not into that sort of setup where you're providing a kosher traditional Jewish meal, but that even college kids, or maybe even especially college kids away from home, have a hunger for maybe some kind of Jewish structure that they either know about or have heard about, or anyway, I guess I just, what you said sort of reminded me of that situation when I came to
Rachel, at the time or before you came, Hillel here had switched over to a frat concept. Mm-hmm. That in order to make Hillel successful, had to be like a fraternity. And then the kitchen was just costing them too much money. They were really going bankrupt with it. Whereas, of course, Chabad does not go on a fraternity model. They go on a home away from home model.
Right.
And so they have a laundromat and a place you can come and study, and but certainly not this idea of a fraternity.
Yeah, I think certainly in communities like this one, it is not so much a spiritual encounter, and there aren't single people going there looking for a place to hang on to. It's a dating scene. It's chicken soup. It's, a very, very, very brief sermon. And it's boys and girls, you're beautiful.
And boys and girls, yeah.
Boys and girls, you're beautiful. Go meet and have dinner.
Get married.
It's a matchmaking scene. I mean, I've been there many times, not in the past, few years, but it's that kind of community feeling. It tends not to be religious, so you don't ever have to have those debates or worry about being shut down or excluded because you're not really participating in that way.
I wanted to raise the issue, and it's what interested me in the film in the first place, and it's something I think about a great deal. It's how much Chabad has taken over the Jewish world internationally, and that it's impossible to go anywhere in which you don't see a Chabad presence as sort of representing the Jewish community today. And we all know the great line of next year for the Seder, so next year in Kathmandu, because the largest Seder in the world is held in Kathmandu. It's filled with itinerant Israelis and Chabad people who are putting on the Seder. But it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And so Judaism, as we've known it in many, many parts of the world, is being transformed by Chabad.
Do we want to end on that?
No, it's reality that we face. I mean, it's like our world is being changed, not necessarily for the better.
Somebody's going to have to remind me when. Somebody's going to have to remind me when my war hero uncle starts.
It's started, and Jack speaks it.
When do I speak? Tell the dog to shut up.
The link is already up, and Jack speaks at 8 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
When,
Rachel.
when was, when the talk was at 8?
It's at 8 tonight.
We will keep it short.
I'm
We will
sorry.
keep it
I think
short.
it's today's email and your UFL email.
Oh yeah, I got it. Okay. And I apologize for missing last night. I tried so hard to stay up. I really like the movie now. But yeah. So everybody enjoy the next show. Many thanks everyone for the discussion. Thanks to Rachel. Rachel left.
You already signed up.
And we'll circle back at 8 o'clock.
Salty.
Everybody.
Hello.